I want to welcome everybody here. It's good to see a nice crowd. I'm Sandy Stanley. I'm president of Clean Air Muscatine. We're also known as CLAM. We appreciate everybody coming today. We have prepared a thoughtful presentation for all of you to think about and hopefully engage in. This event is a joint endeavor. We have joined with the Sierra Club and CLAM to do this presentation. But first I wanted to introduce the CLAM board. We have Ann Hetzler, you all probably met Ann coming in, Jean Clark, Frida Malik Roberts, Franz Stillberger, and Kelly Brown. Kelly isn't here yet. She gets off work later. But CLAM and the Sierra Club have been working together for several months around the issue of focusing on all renewables for Muscatine. Muscatine Power and Water is in the process of making changes in our energy production from coal to most likely a mix of solar and gas. Closing the coal plants is good for our community and the environment. Moving to solar is a positive. Building a fossil plant is not. You will hear more about that from our featured speakers today. Just released in August was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a scientific body convened by the United Nations. They released a major new report concluding that the world cannot avoid some devastating impacts of climate change, but there is still a narrow window to keep the devastation from getting worse. It's a lengthy report, but you can access it online and read it if you want. I wanted to emphasize 2 points from the report. Unlike previous reports, this one dispenses with any doubt about who is responsible for global warming. Quote, "It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land." The second point I wanted to emphasize from the report is that there is still a window in which humans can alter the climate path. Under most of the scenarios discussed in the report, warming will continue well beyond 2040 through the remainder of the century. But the report shows that aggressive, rapid, and widespread emission cuts beginning now, and I emphasize beginning now, could limit the warming beyond 2050. In the most optimistic scenarios, reaching net zero emissions could even bring warming back slightly under the 1.5 degrees Celsius in the second half of the century. I want to present our speakers now, and our first speaker, I wanted to say first that at the end of this, we have three featured speakers today, and at the end there will be a question and answer period. So if you have any questions, and I hope we have some good ones, to hold them until the end. But our first speaker is Frida Malik Roberts, and Frida is a renewable energy advocate for Clean Air Muscatine. She's a relatively new resident, only having moved here in 2019. But she's wasted no time in jumping to a role to help make this community a better place to live. Her background is in ecological biology. She volunteers her time as humane policy volunteer for the Humane Society of the United States. She's a precinct leader during caucus and resource enhancement and protection delegate when necessary. So, Frida?
Thank you, Sandy. Like Sandy said, my name is Frida Malik Roberts. I'm the Renewable Energy Advocate for Clean Air Muscatine. And I have with me tonight some documents that were printed from energy.gov. They are put together by the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and they match the slides that I will have up here for everyone's easy viewing. Sandy, if you could pass those out as I go through them, that would be swell and handy. So starting out, as Sandy noted, under the current trajectory that Muscatine Power and Water has chosen, we're probably looking at going from majority coal use to majority fossil gas use. And I'm going to start our presentation off this evening with some of the known, what they're called challenges, according to the Department of Energy, and the research done on them. So, starting off, we've got fracture fluids. So Sandy will be passing those around so that everybody has access. I tried to print off as many as I could. But I did run out of ink, so some of them are in color, some are black and white, so hopefully there's enough for everybody to share, if necessary, but everyone should have a copy that they take home afterwards if they want. So essentially the fracturing fluid aspect, the challenge of that from the industry, originally it was really more of a well-kept secret. It was unknown exactly what was inside the fracture fluid. They knew that there was a lot of it, there was millions and millions of gallons going into each well. However, we didn't know exactly what they were, so there were, after public outcry, things like water faucets catching on fire, things like that. More regulation was put on the industry, and so they did have to disclose what was the fracturing fluid that they were using. So on the pie chart on the front of that document, you'll see that there are things like biocide, acid, they use silica, known carcinogens, and they do note, on top of the fact that there is a lot of water used in every single well, some of the additives used in the fluid are known to be toxic, while others we have limited data on. We're not exactly sure how they interact with each other, how long they linger in the environment, things like that. We're not 100% sure, so there is a risk involved there. The next impact is surface impacts, is non-water related surface impacts of the fracturing industry. These are things that are caused by damage to our natural heritage from the building of the well pads, the building of new access roads, putting in pipelines, that kind of infrastructure. Turns our natural forest land and our more rural landscapes into industrial zones. They do note that the long-term effects have not been fully evaluated. They know that there are probably negative consequences, but they do state that it's largely unknown. But of course, common sense would dictate that, of course, once a habitat is destroyed, once you have chased out or killed all the wildlife in an area, it is impossible to put it back to the way it was prior. That's just how things work. The third impact is induced seismic events, which is kind of unique to fracking. It's one of the newer issues that people have been kind of scared about when it comes to fracking, and that's because once they are injecting millions of gallons of water into the bedrock, releasing energy, releasing that gas, creating pockets at times that will collapse, and that does induce earthquakes at times. Texas currently has more fracking wells than any other state, and so it's to be assumed they probably have the worst earthquakes. And then the largest earthquake known to be caused specifically by a fracking event was in Texas, and it was a 4.0 magnitude. Most earthquakes can't be felt at the surface. They are small, but according to the National Academy of Science and the research they put into it thus far, they lack comprehensive data. Further research is required. That is a risk that still exists with the industry itself. 4 is air. We're talking about a gas, so air pollution is kind of a given. Natural gas or fracking gas is mostly comprised of methane. Now, when I was in college studying methane, the science was that it was about 40 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide alone. After years of research and getting more detail on methane and the results of air pollution from methane, we now know it's closer to 80 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide alone. And on top of that, it's invisible. So it's a really hard one to pin down and detect in the industry itself, unless you have an infrared filter. So the image on the slide, if you can see it, it's a little hard to see because it's a little too light out here, but it's not an old picture. This is from 2015, taken from a helicopter with an infrared filter. This is an image, it looks like smoke, but it's actually a gas leak. It occurred in the Aliso Canyon in Porter Ranch near LA. A couple years ago there, and the gas leak occurred, at least they think it started around the end of October 2015, and it leaked about 100,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions before it was plugged later in the next year into February. Now, it took them a really long time to plug it because, unfortunately, in the industry, they don't have as much of an incentive to do so quickly, even though the governors put out a state of emergency and they evacuated the town because people were experiencing a lot of health effects. There were nosebleeds, nausea, people were passing out, wildlife was dying off, lots of dead birds in the neighborhoods. People were scared, so they evacuated the town, and eventually they did plug the leak after 100,000 gallons or 100,000 tons were lost. But they, the industry and the utilities can actually pass on that charge, that cost, to consumers, even if the gas never reaches the customer. If anything is lost or unaccounted for on the way to the consumer. Sometimes, even in the system, it's lost on purpose. There are points within the system known as pressure regulators, which determine, they try to keep everything, it's kind of in the name, regulate the pressure. If something gets off, they'll puff out some gas just in the air, and because that is by design, the industry doesn't usually keep track of that. It's not a lot all at once, so they didn't have a number to put on that. But in 2015, when this was happening, there was a California-based environmental group that did some digging and wanted to know, well, if you're kind of negligent in this area, what does this actually look like when we add up the numbers? And they found that in that year alone, in 2015, the citizens of California paid $20 million more for their energy just from that air pollution that was poofing off into nothingness. It was pure air pollution. They weren't getting anything out of it, but they were still being charged for it. The amount that was lost was actually more from that one, mechanism in the system than the entire Aliso Canyon gas leak itself. And they determined that the energy wasted could have powered a vehicle around the equator 285,000 times. So it was a lot of energy. It was all wasted 1 year in one state. So there's a lot of issues with the industry itself on that front. But probably the most impactful at the moment is water pollution from the natural gas industry. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of water that goes into every single well. They require it in order to do their jobs. This is a risk because at the moment, now we did just get some rain, so that was good, but more than 40-45% of the United States as a whole right now is in some kind of drought. The western United States especially is on fire. They are under either severe, extreme, or there's a level above that, exceptional drought they are experiencing, which is what's causing the phenomenons of the wildfires and the dry lightning that they are experiencing. The long-term effects and the long-term risks, groundwater contamination, according to the studies from the Department of Energy, are still unclear. They do need to continue their study, but the fact of the matter is we don't have a limitless supply of water. It is a finite resource, and this industry can be rather wasteful with its water use. On top of taking it from aquatic habitats and from citizens in general, a lot of it doesn't make its way back into the water supply at all because of a best practice in the industry called net fluid balance, which you find in the earthquake document. Basically, when they take a mass of whatever out of the ground, they want to try and replace it with as much as possible of equal mass to keep things from collapsing, keep things from shifting too much. And so if they take, millions of gallons of stuff out of the earth, they want to keep millions of gallons in, which means that fracking fluid, that water, will never make its way through a wastewater treatment facility and back into the drinking water or back into nature. It's just gone, or at least we hope it's gone, because again, it's toxic. We don't want it back without being cleaned. So with that, these are the 5 challenges according to the Department of Energy and the research done by all of those organizations. Now that we have that kind of background information of the beginning of the life cycle of this industry, I'm going to pass it on to our next speaker.
Everyone, so thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to Clan for hosting. It's great to be here. Great to see the turnout. I wasn't sure if people were comfortable to come out, but this is great. So yeah, if you've never heard of Beyond Coal, they've been around since 2010, and Sandy shared what they've done in Iowa in that time, but nationally they've played a role in retiring over 345 coal plants and 7 coal export terminals. And they've also prevented over 100 coal plants from ever being built. So they have been quite a force. And if you track U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, 80% of the decline that's come in the last decade is attributed to the decline of coal power. So Beyond Coal is a national force. So we're lucky to have staff in Iowa. I'm living in Des Moines. We have another full-time staffer who works with me. And we're happy to be here in Muscatine. We've been following what happens at MPW like we track any coal plant in Iowa. So we're really grateful to hear that they're choosing to retire and that the time is right, and it's an approach that makes sense for them. So we believe that Muscatine deserves a 100% clean energy future. And so as much as, I think it's pretty common to see coal being replaced with gas, we would like to see as much renewable energy as possible, and we've seen from other utilities around the country that 100% clean energy is 100% possible. So that means our stance is no new gas. And we have done some analysis on our own to show what a 100% clean energy mix for Muscatine would look like. We've shared that first with the MPW staff and board back in December, and then we updated our numbers after a dialogue, and in June the story's still the same. A 100% clean energy mix can be lower cost and save millions of dollars compared to an expensive gas plant. So that's been our stance. We've been going back and forth about that fairly publicly. That's okay. So we've also repeatedly called for MPW to be more transparent with the public. And that's on the Sierra Club blog in Iowa if you really want to read more about my things I've written about that. And so that's why we reached out and partnered with CLAM to host this forum, is that we decided, hey, let's just host our own forum. There's nothing to bar us from doing that, so here we are. So we know that there will likely be more public forums. NCW has been very transparent about that, but likely only after the decision has been made on what to come in the next phase of their planning. And we think that this should have been happening months ago. So thank you all for coming out, including the staff and board of NCW. Thank you very much. We're right in your neighborhood.
We're right here.
Yeah, they're right over there. Yeah. So why clean energy for Muscatine? What's the big deal, right? Sandy talked about the new UN IPCC report. They just updated that. I don't know how often it comes out, every 2 years? Every 5 years, thank you. Yes. So, if you want to lose sleep at night, you just read up on some climate science. It's a pretty dire situation, and I'll admit I haven't read the full report because even the short condensed version is about 50 pages, but I have read I've been keeping up to date on the highlights in the news, and even though we do have a narrow window to act on climate, I know that report has also said that we already have enough carbon and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to lock us into a pattern of more extreme weather for the next 30 years, which is, I'm under 40, that's most of my most valuable years of my life. If we have kids, this should frighten you. We've had 2 of the last 3 years just here in Iowa, multi-billion-dollar natural disasters that are unlike anything we have ever seen. And we are locked into that for the next 30 years. That's our reality. So we know at Beyond Coal, this has been our campaign for the last 10 years, that we need to get off fossil fuels by 2030. That's been our stance the entire time. And we're serious about it. We're aggressive about it, which is why I'm here today saying, hey, let's not do gas. For this community especially, I think it's important. Muscatine has a legacy of air pollution, which Clean Air Muscatine has been at the forefront of. I grew up here. I have many family and friends here, even tonight. Thank you for coming. I know this is a community that prides itself on its work ethic and its industry. But underneath that are high rates of cancer and asthma. And that's kind of the unspoken thing within this community. A full clean energy future is a course correction that will last for generations. And I know that the MPW board members, I don't think any of them are climate denial or not accepting of the reality of this. But these are tough decisions. It's hard to balance the interests of every stakeholder, the very real cost, reliability, affordability, all of those factors. But the technology and the cost of clean energy are rapidly changing. The price of wind has fallen dramatically in the last couple of decades, which is why we have so much of it here in Iowa. Solar is just a couple years behind that, and the cost of solar has declined by 90% in the last 5-10 years. It's continuing to drop. It is expected to drop by half from where it is today in the next 5 to 10 years. Battery storage, there's new chemistries, new technologies coming out all the time. Everyone's excited about hydrogen, even though that is also very new technology. And Congress is finally getting serious about investing in climate change, which I'm really excited about, frankly. It's long overdue. Knowing this, we've been doing a similar kind of analysis in every state, and we ran the numbers for Muscatine, as I mentioned earlier. And here's what we found. We used an algorithm from the Rocky Mountain Institute. And back in December, we showed, and then again in June, that clean energy portfolio would save millions of dollars. Replacing the coal plant with a mix of wind, solar, and battery storage, NPW would save over $47 million compared to the cost of a gas plant. If you add in investments in energy efficiency and what's called demand response, which includes things like smart meters and weatherizing your home, updating windows, re-wrapping the house to protect it from wind. Things that seem kind of small, but you don't really want to pay for yourself or do the work yourself. Those little things add up. They help to shave off peak demand. And if they strategically invested in these kinds of tools at the scale that a utility can do, including things like smart meters and microgrids, adding that to wind, solar, and batteries would save another $15 million. So that's often an underestimated resource that a lot of utilities, we think, undermodel or underestimate. And they employ people in contract work, jobs that are trade skill jobs that don't require a college degree, though maybe you have one, that's fine. The other part of our analysis is that we showed that a new gas plant would become a stranded asset just 2 years after it's built, even at every size that we modeled. And that's a concern to us because the cost would be carried on to the customers. Basically what that's saying is the gas plant is so expensive that within 2 years the cost of running and maintaining it for the rest of its useful life is more than its worth. That's really going to generate the revenue. So we think that matters. We don't want to see residential customers paying for a plant that's bigger than they need, especially when it's likely that plant was designed to meet the needs of industrial customers over residential customers. So it's got to be a balanced approach. We also support jobs that, investments in clean energy that really build jobs, quality jobs, local jobs here in the community. So investing in things like community solar, solar on your schools, solar on your public buildings, partnering with businesses, which I know MPW is doing. It's exciting. We do more of that and include homeowners and include energy efficiency. We have modeled right here in Iowa of how utilities can do this and have really spurred more local investment in their community. They employ people that can go house to house, also contact me if you really want. So yeah, we're happy NPW's already committed to move from coal. We are happy to see them invest in solar. We have very big public concerns about the gas plant, and we think the community should have more say, be more informed about these decisions, and rather than, you know, continue to show up at meetings and bang more pots and squeak more horns, we're stepping up and filling that gap by having this forum tonight. So thank you all. Yeah, I do also want to say I think NPW is listening. From this back and forth that we've been doing for months now, you know, they're moving ahead with the solar field. They've taken the cost figures from that solar field, so, which are real cost figures. They're not modeling, they're not guessing anymore. And even our analysis is a modeled number. We have real numbers now that fit for Muscatine and what solar will cost. They are using that to reevaluate the next phase of what they do, and we think that's great. They have also, from the back and forth we've had, they've delayed their decision on a potential gas plant by months. So kudos to NPW for that. They are taking this decision seriously. The other thing that I think is important, what's happening in Congress has real effects for this community. There are pieces of this infrastructure bill that would provide new incentives and lower the cost of solar and clean energy even further for NPW. So, you know, there's so much changing in this space right now. I think holding off for even just a few more months could dramatically change the numbers for Muscatine, and I think that's a plus. So if you're thinking you might want to reach out to your local congresswoman about that, or your senator, one piece that we're really keeping an eagle eye on, and we're rooting for MPW on this, is the GREEN Act, the Growing Renewable Energy and Efficiency Now Act, HR 848. This piece would allow, it would lower the cost of solar for MPW. So they've had tax credits for wind and solar for years, right? And basically that's a coupon on your taxes. And that's how companies like Mid-American are able to invest in all this wind, and then they have bucket loads of money that they're saving on taxes, millions of dollars. MPW doesn't get to, you know, they don't pay taxes as a municipal utility, so that's not something they can use. This GREEN Act would allow them to, I believe, get cash grants. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
I think basically, instead of a tax credit. So finally, they would be eligible for those incentives that have been in place for private utilities for years. So we're tracking that, and I think that would definitely help to boost our case even further. So that's another thing you can do, since you're already here tonight. More if you want. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. That's all that I have. Thank you.
I'm going to tell a story. This is the second time that I've been along this river about this place talking about a coal-fired power plant. The last time I did that was 43 years ago. I intervened in the Louisa Generating Station case. It's a monopoly, those utility companies are. They all have an area that they serve, and consequently, somebody has to regulate them. For Muscatine Power and Water, it's a board. For an investor-owned utility, like Iowa, Illinois Gas and Electric, a name you probably haven't heard lately because it's now part of the Mid-American combine. That company in order to build Louisa, had to go to the Iowa Utility Board, called the Commerce Commission at the time, and they had to show their evidence of why they needed a 650 megawatt power plant. We intervened, and we went there and showed that they were wrong, that they needed perhaps a 400 megawatt plant. We lost the case, but we were right. And we know we were right because that same utility board a few years later punished Iowa Illinois Gas and Electric for having too much capacity. Exactly what we said. You don't need a plant that big. You're talking about 7% per year growth in the middle 70s, and that's not going to continue. And we have good evidence to show you why it isn't. They were wrong. We were right. Yes.
Turn around to me. You got a spider on your damn neck, man.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you.
Bet.
Well, I was dramatic.
Didn't want him to bite you on the neck.
I didn't either. Okay. That was one utility company. 1980, I've said, I started out 1978. By the way, I was a college professor teaching economics at Cornell College. That's why I was part of this organization fighting Louisa. We came back again 2 years later. This time it was Iowa Electric. Now everybody's merged, so now the Alliant companies. They came in and they wanted to build the Guthrie County plant. That doesn't exist because they were stopped by that same utility board because the same thing happened. The people who ran this utility company decided that they knew what the evidence was. They needed that power plant, and they were dead wrong. And the utility board stopped them from doing that. So I'm only saying that there's lots of information out there. There's lots of data. It's possible for people of goodwill to go ahead and think that they need a power plant when they, in fact, don't need one. Now, just because it's happened in the past in Iowa, almost right here, because Louisa is just down the river a little ways, just because that happened doesn't mean that this company is also wrong, but I believe they are. And I believe they are for two reasons. And one, they've both been talked about already. And Sandy started out talking about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that every 5 to 7 years comes out and says, what's going on with climate change in the world. And as Sandy said, it is now much more shrill. This is happening. We have to do something about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we shouldn't be putting it in there with the coal-fired power plants, which are the worst. And thank you, Muscatine Power and Water, for deciding that that plant should be closed. It should be. But when you replace it, do not replace it with another fossil fuel plant. Gas is maybe better, although the stuff that Freedom was showing may not be that much better at all in terms of how much carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases get into the atmosphere when you go in that route. But you really can't do it. Whether it's here or in China or any place in the world, stop making new fossil fuels. We cannot take it. Our atmosphere cannot take it. So that's a reason you should be moving towards the solar, which you are, but you ought also be buying a wind plant someplace in the state of Iowa or the state of Illinois. Wind and solar are the cheapest way to produce electricity. And we have the stuff that Freedom was showing, which comes out of the U.S. government. We also have Lazard. Lazard is not an environmental group. They are an advisor to businesses, and they come, and they have been for several years, saying, what is the cost of a new power plant built someplace in the world, especially in the United States? The very cheapest, without question, solar or wind. No question. Gas combined cycle is pretty cheap. Nuclear and new nuclear is impossible. Old nuclear is not that good. And you have to figure out doing things that are moving forward in the direction you want to go. Now, just because it's the very cheapest, solar and wind, realize that if you have a gas plant, you can assure that the kilowatt hours are going to be coming out of that where you can't with solar and wind. So you have to think about storage as well as those renewable sources. But when you put that together, you can do something that the Sierra Club now has shown that you can do cheaper. So back to the beginning. When I was back in 1978, when I was a college professor, getting involved in my first case in the utility industry, I was doing that because of the cost of Louisa, the cost of those that extra capacity, those extra megawatts of Louisa that they were going to put on the bills of people, including poor people. That was my client in the sense that we needed to figure out how to do things more cheaply. It's a rate question. It's a cost question. But it's also now we talk about climate change where I wasn't talking climate change in 1978. But now when we realize the consequences of continuing fossil fuels, both reasons call for us to figure out how we help this company that's already doing 2/3 of the right stuff, closing a plant, opening a renewable plant, to go further and make sure that what replaces this coal-fired power plant is going to be something everybody can be proud of and the company can be proud of. There's no reason why Muscatine can't advertise itself as the cleanest electricity any place in the Union, and we're producing it right here. So we hope that everybody here continues to put pressure on the folks at the company to say, please move towards a total renewable situation. Sierra Club is already telling you what that is and how it can actually save money for the ratepayers, and it's certainly got to take on climate change. Thank you.
As has been stated aptly multiple times, climate change is real, and we can do something about it in our own backyard. We are asking that you sign the petition. We have telling MPW we do not want a gas plant. Ann has the petitions. Many of you probably signed it already. But if not, you can talk to Ann and sign it. You can also go online and sign them at sc.org/M-P-W. Again, that's sc.org/M-P-W. Encourage your friends and neighbors to do the same. You can sign up for MPW's Choose Green program. We also have pamphlets here at the back. I think Ann has pamphlets on the Choose Green program, and that will give you more information about it and also on their website. The MPW trustee board meetings are open to the public and held the last Tuesday of the month at 5:30 p.m. at their office, which is literally across the street from here at 3205 Cedar Street. There is a time for citizens to speak at the MPW trustee board meeting, so you can go and speak, or if you choose, you can just sit and listen to what's happening in our community with our municipally owned utilities. The next meeting is this Tuesday, August 28th. But before we go, we want to thank you for your interest in coming to the forum, and also open it up for some questions that you may have for any of our panelists. Yeah, Carl?
Duke Energy, which is very predominant in the southeast, has been working with the Department of Energy and with other commissions at the federal level, and apparently they are in the process of starting two, and I'm going to use the word modular nuclear plants. Do you think there would be a chance that CLAM would recommend this to Muscatine Farm Water?
I can't really answer that question because that's not something we've even looked at.
I hope not. I'm afraid the NuScale plant the main ones they're looking at.
Yeah.
Small 70 megawatt to 100 megawatt plants.
Yeah.
Brand new technology. We have been hearing about brand new nuclear technology for a very long time, and every time you hear the word new and nuclear, the cost overruns are about 4 times.
Yeah.
Cost overruns for the only 2 nuclear power plants being built in the United States right now, the Georgia Power, the Southern Power Company plants,
Yeah.
were supposed to be online in 2016. They are not done yet. They were supposed to cost $14 billion. They're now going to cost 27 now. I'm sure that by the time they are online, it will have doubled. No, don't build a new nuclear power plant. But on the other hand, just to make sure that you know where I'm standing, keep Clinton, keep Quad Cities, Braidwood, and Byron, all of those plants as long as you can until we can replace them with renewable energy. An existing nuclear power plant, fine. One that has to be built from brand new, no. It's just not going to be possible. And it's a cost issue. I'm not talking anything about, you know, terrorism or finding some place for the waste or any of those kind of things that generally come up. Remember, I'm an economist. They're too expensive. Period.
Along with that, Muscatine plant, there's been a battle royal over the years here because grain processing blames Muscatine, Muscatine's MPW blames grain processing, and the bottom line, we have a very high rating in SO2 pollution. What should the effort be with us as citizens of Clam to get involved in that?
I'll answer that one.
All right.
So the Sierra Club, we've been tracking the SO2 around Muscatine for years. We submitted comments to the Iowa DNR most recently in January. Yeah. We've been tracking the Sierra Club, the SO2 in Muscatine for years. We submitted comments most recently in 2019 to the Iowa DNR around, Muscatine is the only county in all of Iowa that's in what they call non-attainment status, meaning that they're out of compliance, basically, with the Clean Air Act for SO2. During the Trump administration, they had a specific rule in the EPA that they rolled back that would change that status for Muscatine. And now the Biden administration has put a stay on that, so they've pressed pause on that switch happening. So obviously retiring the coal would bring Muscatine out of non-compliance. But now, just in the last week, we've seen, or I'm seeing, GPC wants to be allowed to emit more SO2 now that these coal plants are coming online. What's left out of this equation is there is a giant coal plant owned by Mid-American just down in Louisa County, and that plant is not part of this special status that Muscatine has, but I think I mean we're all affected by air pollution. But this is all just part of the regulatory bureaucratic process, right? So that's something that, you know, if I'm living in Muscatine, that's something I would care about, because obviously taking down a coal plant you're gonna see the SO2 drop significantly, but you've got to be careful not to see it then just get that gas filled up by other industries, because it's finally a chance for Muscatine to have clean air, and they deserve clean air.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
I know Franz had his hand up first.
But in regards to modular units, I did some reading. What's the feasibility of using modular hydrogen facilities?
I'll take this one.
Go for it.
We're trying to track, the world of hydrogen energy is everyone's excited. The technology is very new, very untested. It's gaining traction in Europe, especially Germany, more than the U.S. There's different types of hydrogen. They kind of call them by color: blue, green. Green comes from wind power. Brown, and I think black. Don't ask me to explain all of them. I don't have that memorized, but not all hydrogen power is the same, right? And there are some very basic things that we don't know about hydrogen technology. One, we don't know if hydrogen as a fuel can be transported through natural gas pipelines. You may need to install a new pipeline. We don't know that hydrogen and gas can be burned together. We don't know that hydrogen can be burned on the same boilers that gas is burned on. We don't know that. Hydrogen has a different density, it burns hotter, there's all kinds of safety concerns. I'm more optimistic that we'll figure these things out over the next decade or so. I think hydrogen has a place in our future energy system, but I think at this moment in time it's a little overhyped. That's my personal take. The Sierra Club doesn't have an official stamp on hydrogen power. I think we would be supportive of green hydrogen that comes from wind power, and actually Iowa is very well suited for green hydrogen. We already have excess wind power. Every time a wind turbine is curtailed, we instead could be running that turbine and storing the power it generates in hydrogen fuel. But there's just so much to figure out. We also don't know, should it be transported by rail, by truck? All things you don't know. But it's possible, and I know that's something that MPW is very interested in.
I know, I just read an article recently that it costs a lot of money to separate the hydrogen, and also emits a lot of pollutants in doing so.
Yeah, that's the other thing. We don't actually know that it's cleaner.
Right.
And then when you add more, if you're taking wind energy and then turning it into a fuel, you're losing some energy there, right? So, is it worth it? That kind of goes back to your question. Is it feasible? No, it's not clear.
Yeah, I read something recently where they said that hydrogen for decades has been a decade away. But Dan, you had a question?
My question is about this stranded asset concern, and now only 2 years in, we think it would cost more to operate the natural gas plant than worth. And how does GPC factor into that? Is it because something that we're projecting about, we're subsidizing grain processing corporations, and do we think that's going to go away, or I don't really understand how it's a stranded asset 2 years in.
I'm not sure how to answer that. The GPC question, I think, is separate than the stranded asset question in my mind.
I thought maybe it was a projection related to GPC's continuing need or use.
We have tried to get that answer. I know MPW has always referred us to GPC because, and we haven't really gotten answers from them either. We tried. But there is it is tied together with, they buy the steam, that's from MPW. And so MPW makes money off of that, and it benefits GPC. And I think there's, going to be some ethical issues too with, the GPC as one of their staff people is on the board of MPW, and they're going to be voting on this gas plant. They're going to benefit or not benefit, and I would hope that person would recuse himself, from voting, because that's obviously going to be something they're going to benefit from.
Say more about stranded assets.
Okay, would you answer that better than I go off there? A lot of research on that.
Yeah, so starting from the basic level, my analogy is a stranded asset is like when your car gets in an accident and it costs more to fix it than it would to replace it, your car has become a stranded asset. And so when you take it to the shop and they say, well, you know, it's going to cost $3,000 to fix it, and you decide to just go buy a new car, that's the kind of decision that they're kind of having to face. So you know they've got to pay for that plant, and if you're expecting it to run for 30 years, and you'll be paying for it for 30 years, and then actually it's going to be more expensive, and you're not going to pay it off until 42 years. That becomes a stranded asset, and then you're asking customers to pay more to pay off the plant. So there's other financial tools that a utility, because utilities are unique, right? They're not like your typical business. Munis are different from like an investor-owned utility, but there are some financial tools that a utility could use to deal with that financial situation. Or the better option is to just avoid it if you can. So I think our concern with like Sandy, I don't have insights into the financial arrangements or anything between MPW and GPC, but they do have this steam contract, which is tied to units at the plant that are going to be retired by 2023 and replaced with solar. And so you're going to have this window of 5 or 6 years where GPC actually has their own natural gas burning unit. They're going to be generating their own steam while MPW transitions to whatever they decide. And then will GPC continue to make their own steam, or will they renegotiate a contract with MPW? That's our campaign's concern. They can easily build a gas plant that's bigger than they need and renegotiate a contract with GPC that's pretty lucrative for MPW, but then customers are left paying for this plant that's actually been designed to fit the needs of GPC. So that's why we raised that as an issue. We don't think that's fair.
The price of gas too fluctuates too.
Yeah, the price of gas.
As you mentioned a little bit earlier, you touched on the Green Act. The Green Act is just one aspect of which makes the future of natural gas infrastructure itself a little bit more unpredictable, because with the new administration and the rules that were reduced under the Trump era now being replaced and then added to in the new administration, there's the Green Act, like Katie mentioned, there's the LIFT Act, there was another one, I don't recall at the moment, and several other executive orders that might not directly say like natural gas is going to be more expensive, but they're tied to regulations in the industry. And we know from my slides that the gas industry doesn't have any qualms with pushing costs so that they get charged onto the consumer. So whatever changes are going to happen within the industry, it's only going to make it more expensive. Nothing in gas is going to get cheaper considerably moving forward, but we do know that it's going to eventually get more and more and more expensive as regulations pertaining to the fluid, pertaining to the air pollution, pertaining to the water pollution, finally fall on the correct shoulders, which is the industry itself having to clean up after themselves instead of falling on us. So gas, as it's going to get more expensive, if that's the direction that Muscatine goes towards, if those regulations kick in and make it more expensive, that is going to induce the asset to become stranded when we could have avoided that outcome. That's a way I look at it.
Do you have any other questions or? Oh, Jessica?
Just one comment, one question. Dan, in regards to stranded asset, it's just like coal. They're shutting down because it's more expensive to run coal than it's worth and then transitioning to renewables. The same thing is going to happen with natural gas. But my question is, so I look at the stranded asset and the numbers that have been presented by the Sierra Club and Rocky Mountain Institute, and according to the numbers, 2 years into the plant, it's gonna be more expensive to run. So what's the plan after that? Is there a plan? I mean, are we just gonna run, and keep paying more when it's worse? Are we just gonna continue that? Or is there another plan? Because it seems like MPW really needs to be, looking at the next step, because after 2 years, we gotta come up with a better plan. You've got 2 years of an asset that you will be able to use without, you know, it being more expensive to run this. So, I'm interested in knowing the next plan. If you guys have heard, or if anybody would like to share.
We could get real cynical with that real quick, but no, I don't think we've been. One step at a time is where we are on that. I think the future of the industry itself is as unknown as the natural gas industry because of the Green Act, because of rejoining the Paris Accord, the other acts and executive orders in place, the pollution control measures. So it's unknown.
Well, and I'll go off on a little tangent here, but just look at the last year and a half. There was, when COVID hit, there was one day where oil and gas futures were negative. Do you remember that? This is one day. What happened, right? The Federal Reserve stepped up and bought hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate stock, bad corporate stock, or bonds, bad corporate bonds from oil and gas companies, to shore up their debt and finance it with no strings attached. If you aren't outraged about that, you should be. They did that, things went back to normal, then comes February, we have this polar vortex, prices are sky high because Texas is, running their own grid, nearly deregulated. Just crazy what happened there. It affected everyone. Even here in Iowa and western Iowa, people saw their utility bills go up $500 that month. Even though their power never went out, they weren't facing any extreme. Okay, and then the summer we have extreme heat, prices are high again. And now right now with the economy starting to open back up, right now there's a trade dispute between Asia and Australia. Asia is not getting its coal from Australia. They're getting it from us right now. Coal exports are up 30 times over what they were last year because gas prices are high again. So coal is cheap and we're sending it to Asia. That's in the last 18 months. So, any utility that's trying to make sense of what to do 20, 30 years from now, this is a really hard decision, and that's why, as much as we focus on the technical details here, this needs to be a moral decision. Everywhere, every community, every state, because we have to transition off fossil fuels. What else to say?
I agree. Carl, you had a question?
Yes, well, just one. If you three had to make a decision right now as to whether Muscatine should go either wind or solar, which would you do and why?
I don't necessarily see the reason to pick and choose. They both have their own positives and benefits. Honestly, it would depend on the situation of the state code at the moment. Because at the moment, the wind incentives are geared towards the output from your farm. So the more you can create, more energy you can create with your wind farm, the better your situation will be. So they incentivize building these gigantic wind farms, which isn't necessarily great for the industry because even though you're building a lot of wind farms, that clogs the system. The infrastructure in place was built during the industrial revolution. We're working on infrastructure that's built around fossil fuel usage. So it's not really geared to handle the inclement wind generation from that kind of generation. So as the code stands right now, probably solar would be my choice because of that. But that can change at any point depending on who we elect into power.
Agnostic.
Fair enough.
I would start to slowly build solar, and I would wait until after Congress passes this infrastructure bill, and hopefully transmission gets upgraded. And yeah, I would just keep investing in solar and delay my decision as long as possible.
Okay, Dan? Oh,
With this, regard to wind, the turbines blades, it's, come to my attention that disposal of these blades, they have no way of disposing of them
Oh yeah.
other than burying them with the potential of them never self-destructing.
Right.
That bothers me. Every time I see a wind farm, I think, what are we gonna do with those blades? What's your feelings about that?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't have a good answer.
I know they're looking at that. I've read an article recently where that is seriously being looked at.
We look something to death.
Well, yes, and recycling and, yeah, but I mean, instead of just ignoring it and saying, okay, bury it, at least they're saying this is a problem and we need to examine it.
I mean, that in itself just cuts wind clear out of the picture. And
Yeah.
I and 4 other guys, when I shut down my drilling company, 12 years ago, I and 4 other guys looked very seriously at starting up a wind farm in eastern Colorado. And, oh my God, that deal fell through. Because we've been in hell of a legal suit right now.
Well, you know, one thing about wind, in most cases we have more time. The only reason we're getting a lot of blades up now is people are repowering already existing wind farms because it is so cheap to do that. Those blades ought to be there for 20, 30 years. They've been coming off only because you've been putting longer ones on and jiggering with all the stuff up in the nacelle to make more power come out. And we have time enough to figure out some stuff to do. The latest thing I saw is to use those blades for electric lines. They're long. They can go into the ground, and if you can figure out how to do it, they turn out to be as good as cement or as good as wood in carrying electricity. Now that's, you know, I don't have any numbers on that. I'm not sure that's any real possibility, but you got some time on that question. You don't have any time at all when it comes to climate change.
Good point.
One of the things that I read in construction related magazine, and apparently they've done some tests on these blades being ground up as plastic and used as equivalent to paving or blacktopping a road. That the preliminary tests are indicating that it's far better than, quote, seal coat.
Dan,
Seal
you
coat
want
is oil production.
Yeah,
to say something else?
right.
I want to go back to nuclear one more time. I heard David emphatically say, no, don't look at nuclear, but I wonder, does the Sierra Club have a position on nuclear? And if we're talking about renewables, is that in our mix?
Yeah, the Sierra Club does have a position on nuclear. They are against it until new technology comes out, basically. When they'll be evaluate that, but mainly because the mining is pretty destructive, the waste storage issue, and every nuclear plant leaks. It's just a matter of time.
Anybody else have a question?